The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning when the first gold leaves were beginning to show among the apple trees, and Lyra Northwood knew something was wrong the moment the mail carrier's easy smile faltered. Henrik Zander had been bringing letters to her roadside cider press for just over a year now. His wagon rattling up the dusty frontier, rode every few days with parcels and correspondence for the scattered homesteads that dotted the borderlands. He always had a joke ready, always lingered a bit longer than necessary, always found some reason to compliment her latest batch of cider or the way she had arranged the autumn gourds by the roadside stand. She had grown to anticipate those visits the way she anticipated the first frost or the spring bloom, something pleasant and inevitable that marked the passing of seasons. This morning, though, he climbed down from his wagon with a single envelope in his hand and none of his usual cheerful banter. The envelope was travel-stained and creased, addressed in blocky script that made her chest tighten with recognition even before she saw the return location marked in the corner. "Morning, Lyra," Henrik said, and his voice was careful in a way it had never been before. This came through the regional hub, long way from the Eastern Front. She wiped her hands on her apron, her green fingers leaving damp streaks on the worn fabric. The press house behind her smelled of fresh apples and fermenting juice, the scent that had defined her life for the past 3 years, since she had bought this plot of land and built her business from nothing. She had made something of herself here on the frontier, far from the clustered orc settlements where she had grown up, far from the memories that had shaped and then scarred her. "The Eastern Front," she repeated, and took the envelope. The paper felt heavy in her hand, weighted with more than ink and words. Henrik watched her face. He was a good-looking man in an unassuming way, sandy-haired and lean, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned. He wore the leather satchel of his trade slung across his chest and the dust of the road on his boots, and for a year now they had been dancing around each other with the kind of careful flirtation that never quite tipped into something more real. "You want me to wait?" he asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice that made her tusks catch on her lower lip when she tried to smile. "I might need you to read it," she admitted, the words coming out smaller than she intended. "My human script is not so good. I can manage accounts and simple things, but this looks like a lot of words." She held out the envelope, and when Henrik took it, their fingers brushed. The contact sent a small shock up her arm, the same sensation she felt every time they accidentally touched when he handed over parcels, or she passed him a jug of cider for his route. He opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the pages inside. There were 3 sheets, covered front and back in cramped handwriting. Henrik's eyes tracked across the first few lines, and she saw the exact moment he understood what he was reading. His expression shifted, something closing off behind his eyes even as his smile remained fixed in place. "You sure you want me to read this?" he asked. "Please." He cleared his throat. "It starts, 'My dearest Lyra, 4 years have passed since I marched away to the border wars, and not a day has gone by that I have not thought of you. I was a fool to leave the way I did, to choose duty over love, to think that fighting for our people's place in this world mattered more than the life we could have built together." Lyra's hands had gone still on her apron. She could picture Garth as clearly as if he stood before her, his broad shoulders and serious eyes, the way he used to hold her hand when they walked through the evening markets in their old settlement. They had been young together, had planned a future together, and then the call had come for able-bodied orcs to join the border defense forces, and he had gone without hesitation, certain that proving orcish loyalty and strength would earn their people respect and recognition. Henrik continued reading, his voice steady but increasingly flat. I have served with honor. I have fought beside humans and orcs alike. I have seen things that changed me, Lyra, and the main thing they taught me is that nothing matters more than the people we love. The commanding officers say the war is winding down, that we will be released from service within the year. I want to come back to you. I want to build the life we talked about before I left. I want to make things right. There was more. Details about Garth's service and his plans and his hopes, but Lyra had stopped listening to the actual words. She was hearing the subtext, the thing that Garth was really asking. Would she take him back? Could they return to what they had been? Did she still love him the way she had when they were both young and certain that love was enough? When Henrik finished reading, he folded the pages back into the envelope with mechanical precision. His smile had not wavered, but it looked painted on now, a mask that he wore out of habit rather than feeling. Sounds like he really means it, Henrik said, and handed the envelope back to her. That's good. Good that he realizes what he had. He left me, Lyra said, and her voice came out harder than she intended. 4 years ago, he chose the war over me. He said it was important, that it mattered for our people's future. I told him I understood, but I also told him I would not wait. I told him I would move on. Did you? Henrik asked, and there was something raw in the question that made her look at him sharply. I came here, she said. I built this. She gestured at the press house, at the orchard stretching up the hillside behind it, at the roadside stand where travelers stopped to buy cider and apples. I made a life. That's not the same as moving on, Henrik said quietly. She wanted to argue, but the truth was she did not know how to answer. Had she moved on? She had not taken another lover, had not even considered it until Henrik started showing up with his easy charm and his lingering glances. She had poured herself into work, into building something solid and real that could not abandon her. But her heart had stayed carefully locked away, protected, unused. What are you going to do? Henrik asked. I do not know, Lyra said honestly. I need to think. Right, of course. Henrik climbed back up onto his wagon seat with a practiced swing. Well, I have got the rest of the route to run. I will see you in a few days, I suppose. Henrik, she said, and he paused, reins in hand, looking back at her with those careful, guarded eyes. Thank you for reading it. Any time, he said, and flicked the reins. The wagon rolled away down the dusty road, and Lyra stood watching until it disappeared around the bend, the letter heavy in her hand, and her mind full of questions she could not answer. The next few days passed in a blur of work and worry. The apple harvest was reaching its peak, and Lyra spent her daylight hours in the orchard with the 2 seasonal workers she had hired, picking fruit and hauling baskets down to the press house. The physical labor was good, kept her hands busy and her body tired, but it did nothing to quiet the endless circle of her thoughts. She read Garth's letter again and again, struggling through the human script until she had memorized every word. Part of her wanted to feel the rush of old love returning, wanted to remember why she had cared for him so deeply. But the girl who had loved Garth felt like a stranger now, someone young and naive, who had believed that love was simple and that people stayed. Henrik did not come back on his usual schedule. 3 days passed, then 4, and Lyra found herself watching the road more often than she should, listening for the rattle of wagon wheels. She told herself it was just because she had grown accustomed to his visits, that it meant nothing more than habit. But she knew she was lying. On the 5th day, she left her workers to manage the pressing and walked the 3 miles down to Miller's Crossing, the small frontier settlement that served as the hub for the scattered homesteads in the area. The town was barely more than a dozen buildings clustered around a crossroads, but it had a general store, a smithy, a tavern, and a postal depot where Henrik picked up the mail for his route. The depot manager was a grizzled human named Thomas, who had been running the postal service in the borderlands for 20 years. He looked up from his sorting table when Lyra ducked through the low doorway, and his weathered face creased into a smile. "Lyra Northwood," he said. "Don't usually see you down here. Everything all right at the press?" "Fine," she said. "I was looking for Henrik. Is he sick?" Thomas's expression shifted into something more cautious. "Henrik? No, he's well enough. Asked for a few days off, though. Said he had some personal business to attend to. Got a substitute running his route right now." "Personal business," Lyra repeated, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Did he say what kind?" "Not the sort of man to share his troubles," Thomas said. "But he looked pretty rough when he came in, I will tell you that. Like he had not been sleeping. I have known Henrik 5 years now, and I have never seen him turn down work before." Lyra thanked Thomas and left the depot, her mind churning. Henrik had read Garth's letter and then disappeared, and she did not have to be clever to understand why. She had been so caught up in her own confusion that she had not stopped to consider what it meant to him, this man who had been courting her with patient persistence for over a year, to read aloud another man's declaration of love. She walked back to the press house slowly, thinking hard. The afternoon sun slanted through the apple trees, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The harvest was good this year, the best she had ever had, and her business was finally profitable enough that she could think about expanding, maybe buying the adjacent plot and planting more trees. She had built something real here, something that was entirely hers, but alone. When she reached the press house, she found one of her workers waiting with news that a traveler had stopped by looking for lodging. Lyra had 2 small rooms she rented out to travelers during the harvest season, a way to make extra income from the steady trickle of people moving along the frontier roads. She told the worker to show the traveler to the room and went to wash up before meeting her new guest. The man waiting in front of the press house was Orc. Lyra stopped dead when she saw him, her heart lurching in her chest. He was exactly as she remembered, tall and broad-shouldered, with the bearing of a soldier and eyes that had seen too much. He wore travel-stained clothes and carried a worn pack, and when he saw her, his face split into a smile that was achingly familiar. "Lyra," Garth said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered, deep and warm and certain. "I could not wait. I had to see you." She stood frozen, unable to process the fact that he was actually here, real and solid and standing in front of her press house. The letter had felt distant, something that existed only in words, but Garth's physical presence made everything suddenly, terrifyingly real. "You were not supposed to be released for months," she managed to say. "I took leave," he said. "Called in every favor I had. I needed to see you, needed to know if we still had a chance." He stepped forward, and she saw the changes the war had carved into him. There were scars on his hands and a hardness around his eyes that had not been there before, but underneath it all, he was still Garth, the man she had loved when she was younger and more foolish. "You cannot just show up like this," she said, and heard the tremor in her own voice. "I can if you still love me," Garth said simply. "Do you, Lyra? Do you still love me?" It was the question she had been asking herself for days, and she still did not have an answer. The girl she had been would have said yes without hesitation, would have thrown herself into his arms and forgiven everything. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned to stand alone, who had built a life that did not need anyone else to be complete. "I do not know," she said honestly. "Garth, it has been 4 years. I am not the same person I was." "Neither am I," he said. "But that does not mean we cannot be something together, something better than what we were." She wanted to argue, wanted to send him away, but she could not find the words. Instead, she offered him the room she rented to travelers and told him she needed time to think. He accepted with the same patient understanding he had always shown, and she retreated to the press house, her mind a chaos of conflicting feelings. That evening, after the workers had left and the orchard was quiet, Lyra sat on the porch of the press house and tried to sort through everything she felt. Garth's arrival had shaken loose something she had been carefully avoiding, the realization that she had been hiding. She had built this life, this business, this careful solitude, as a way to protect herself from being hurt again. She had not moved on from Garth, she had simply stopped moving altogether. And then Henrik had arrived, with his easy smiles and his gentle persistence, and slowly, carefully, he had started to wake something in her that she thought had died. She had been so focused on protecting herself that she had not recognized what was happening until it was too late. She cared about Henrik, more than cared. The thought of him reading that letter, of the hurt in his eyes when he understood what it meant, made her chest ache in a way that felt like grief. But Garth was here. Garth, who represented everything she had wanted when she was young, the safe and certain love that she had mourned losing. Garth, who had chosen duty over her once but now promised to put her first. Garth, who knew her history and her people and would never look at her with the suspicion that humans sometimes did. She did not sleep that night. She lay in her small bedroom above the press house and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the wind in the apple trees and trying to understand her own heart. Henrik came back a week later, driving his wagon up the road as if nothing had changed. Lyra was in the orchard when she heard the familiar rattle of wheels, and she climbed down from the ladder where she had been picking apples and walked quickly toward the press house, her heart hammering. He was unloading mail at the roadside stand when she reached him, his movements efficient and practiced. He looked tired, she thought, with shadows under his eyes that had not been there before, but his smile was back in place when he turned to greet her. "Morning, Lyra," he said. "Sorry I've been away. Had some things to take care of." "Henrik," she said, and stopped, not sure what she wanted to say. She had rehearsed a dozen different speeches in her head, but none of them felt right now that he was actually standing in front of her. "How are you doing?" he asked, and the careful neutrality in his voice made her want to scream. "Did you answer your letter?" "No," she said. "I have not, but Garth is here. He arrived 6 days ago. He took leave to come see me." She watched Henrik absorb this information, saw the way his jaw tightened and his hand stilled on the mail pouch, but he just nodded, as if she had told him something as ordinary as the weather. "That is good," he said. "Shows he is serious." "Henrik, please do not do this," Lyra said, and the words came out sharper than she intended. "Do not pretend you do not care." "What do you want me to say?" Henrik asked, and for the first time she heard real emotion break through his careful control. "You have a man who loves you, who came all the way from the front to win you back. A man you have history with. What exactly am I supposed to do with that?" "I do not know," she admitted, "but I do not want you to disappear. I do not want you to smile and pretend and act like the past year meant nothing." "It meant something," Henrik said quietly. "That is the problem." They stood looking at each other across the space that separated the wagon from the press house, and Lyra felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on her chest. She wanted to tell him that she had been waiting for his visits, that his smile had become the best part of her week, that somewhere in the past year she had started imagining a future that included him. But Garth was here, solid and real and waiting, and she could not speak those words while she was still caught between two possibilities. "I should finish my route," Henrik said, breaking the silence. "I will see you next time." "Wait," Lyra said, but he was already climbing back onto the wagon, already flicking the reins. She watched him drive away, feeling like she was losing something precious that she had not known she had until it was gone. Garth found her standing by the road an hour later, staring at nothing. He approached cautiously, reading her mood with the skill of someone who had once known her well. "Was that your mail carrier?" he asked. "Yes." He seemed upset. Lyra turned to look at Garth, this man who had shaped so much of her past. He was watching her with genuine concern, without jealousy or accusation, and she realized that he truly did not understand what he was asking her to give up. "Garth," she said slowly, "did you ever think about what my life might be like now? What I might have built while you were gone?" "Of course," he said. "You built this place. It is impressive, Lyra. You should be proud." "I am," she said. "But that is not what I am asking. Did you think about whether I might have met someone else? Whether I might have moved on the way I said I would?" Garth's expression shifted, surprise and something like hurt flickering across his face. "Have you?" he asked. "Is it the mail carrier?" "I do not know," she said, and realized as she spoke that it was the truest thing she had said in days. "I thought I had moved on. I thought I had locked that part of myself away and that it did not matter. And then Henrik showed up and he kept showing up, and somewhere along the way I started to care. But I do not know how much I care, or whether it is real, or whether I am just afraid of being alone." "You do not have to be alone," Garth said gently. "That is why I came back. Lyra, we can have the life we always talked about. I know I hurt you when I left, but I want to make that right. I want to spend the rest of my life making it right." She looked at him, this good man who had once been everything to her, and felt the weight of the choice she had to make pressing down on her shoulders. It would be so easy to say yes. To choose the known over the unknown, the certain past over the uncertain future. Garth represented safety, understanding, a love that had already been tested and proven. Henrik was a risk, a human who might not stay, who might break her heart the way Garth had. But even as she thought it, she knew that was not fair. Henrik had shown up for a year, steady and reliable, never pushing but never leaving either. He had made her laugh, had listened to her talk about cider making and orchard management with genuine interest, had treated her not as an orc or a curiosity but simply as Lyra. And somewhere in that year he had slipped past her defenses and made her hope again. "I need more time," she told Garth. "I cannot give you an answer yet." He nodded slowly, disappointment clear in his eyes but acceptance in his posture. "I understand," he said. "I will wait as long as you need." The harvest continued, and Garth helped with the work. He was strong and capable, and the seasonal workers accepted his presence without comment. He fit into the rhythm of the orchard easily, and Lyra found herself remembering why she had loved him. He was steady, reliable, someone who did not need to be told what to do. They fell into an easy companionship that felt familiar and comfortable, and sometimes she would catch herself thinking that maybe this was enough. Maybe comfortable and safe was better than the uncertain thrill she felt when Henrik smiled at her. But then Henrik would arrive with the mail, and the air would change. He was unfailingly polite, never stayed longer than necessary, but Lyra could feel the tension radiating from him whenever Garth was nearby. The easy banter they had shared for a year was gone, replaced by careful formality that made her chest ache. 2 weeks after Garth's arrival, Henrik came when Lyra was alone at the press house. The workers had the day off, and Garth had ridden into Miller's Crossing to purchase supplies. Henrik climbed down from his wagon and approached with an envelope in hand, and Lyra's breath caught when she saw it was addressed to her in Garth's handwriting. "Another one," Henrik said, and there was something brittle in his voice. "Came through today. I guess he is writing you from here now." Lyra took the envelope, confused. Why would he write me a letter when he is staying here? Maybe he is better with words on paper, Henrik said. Some people are. She opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet. The message was brief. I have been called back to the front. Emergency orders. I have to leave tomorrow morning. Please, Lyra, give me an answer before I go. I cannot spend another day not knowing if we have a future. Bad news? Henrik asked, watching her face. He has to go back, Lyra said, her mind reeling. Tomorrow. Henrik nodded slowly. So you have to decide. I suppose I do. They stood in silence, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, and Lyra felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was it, the point where she had to choose between the man who represented her past and the man who might be her future. Can I ask you something? Henrik said abruptly. Yes. Why me? Out of everyone you could have let in, why did I get through? Lyra looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the easy smile to the vulnerability underneath. She saw the scars he carried, the careful distance he kept from everyone, the way he used charm as a shield. And she realized, suddenly and completely, that he was as scared as she was. That he had been hurt before, badly enough that he had spent years protecting himself, and that letting himself care about her had cost him something real. Because you kept showing up, she said quietly. Because you did not push or demand or try to change me. Because you made me laugh. Because when I talked, you actually listened. Because you saw me, not the orc woman running a cider press, but me. Henrik's careful mask cracked, and she saw real emotion flood across his face. Hope and fear and longing all mixed together in a way that made her heart twist. I was engaged once, he said abruptly. 6 years ago. We had the wedding planned, had the farm picked out, had the whole future mapped. And a week before the ceremony, she came to me and said she could not do it. Said she had realized she did not love me enough. Just like that, it was over. Henrik, Lyra said, but he shook his head. I am telling you this because you deserve to know why I am like this. Why I flirt and smile and never let anyone close. I thought I was safe with you. I thought, she is probably not interested anyway. She has got her whole life sorted. I can just enjoy her company and it will not matter. And then that letter came, and I realized I had done exactly what I swore I would never do again. I fell for someone who might choose someone else. Lyra felt tears burning behind her eyes. I am not her, she said. I would not do that to you. I know, Henrik said. That is what makes this so much worse. You are not cruel, Lyra. You are careful and thoughtful, and you take your commitments seriously. And Garth is a good man. I can see that. He loves you. He came all this way for you, and he represents everything that makes sense. I am just the mail carrier who happened to show up at the right time. That is not true, Lyra said, and her voice broke on the words. You are not just anything. They looked at each other, and Lyra felt the world narrow down to just the two of them, standing in the autumn sunshine with everything unsaid hanging in the air between them. She wanted to step forward, wanted to close the distance, but Garth's letter was still in her hand, and the weight of her choice was still pressing down on her shoulders. I have to go, Henrik said finally. I have got the rest of the route to finish. He climbed back onto his wagon and drove away, and Lyra stood watching until he was out of sight, her heart hammering and her mind made up. Garth returned in the evening, his pack already loaded for the early morning departure. They shared a quiet dinner in the press house, and Lyra was grateful that he did not push for an immediate answer. But as the evening wore on and the time for her decision drew closer, she felt the pressure building in her chest like a coming storm. Finally, when the sun had set and the orchard was dark around them, Garth turned to her with steady, patient eyes. I need to know, he said gently. I am sorry to push, but I have to leave before dawn and I cannot go without knowing where we stand." Lyra took a deep breath. She had spent the afternoon thinking, really thinking about what she wanted. Not what she should want, not what was safe or sensible, but what would make her happy. And the answer, once she stopped being afraid of it, was clear. "I loved you," she said quietly. "When we were young, I loved you very much, and I think part of me will always love the memory of who we were together." "But," Garth said, and there was resignation already in his voice. "But I am not that girl anymore," Lyra continued. "And you are not that boy. We have both changed, Garth. You went to war and became a soldier. I came here and became a business owner. We grew into different people, people who might not fit together the way we once did." "We could try," Garth said. "We could learn to fit again." "We could," Lyra agreed. "But that would mean both of us compromising who we have become. And I do not want that. I do not want to spend my life trying to get back to something that is already gone." Garth was silent for a long moment, his hands folded on the table between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion but steady. "Is it the mail carrier?" "Yes," Lyra said simply. "I think it is." "Does he know?" "No, I have been too afraid to tell him, too afraid to risk it." Garth reached across the table and took her hand, his grip firm and warm. "Then you should tell him," he said. "Life is too short to spend it being afraid, Lyra. I learned that the hard way. Do not make the same mistake I did." Tears were running down her face now, and she did not try to stop them. "I am sorry," she said. "I am so sorry, Garth." "Do not be," he said, and managed a small smile. "You are right. We are not who we were, and you deserve to be happy with who you are now, not who you used to be." They talked late into the night, saying goodbye to the past and the future they had once imagined together. It hurt, but it was the clean kind of hurt, the kind that came from doing the right thing even when it was hard. When Garth finally retired to his room, Lyra sat alone in the press house and let herself cry for everything she was letting go. But underneath the grief, there was also hope. Fragile and uncertain, but real. Garth left before dawn, and Lyra stood in the doorway of the press house to watch him go. He embraced her once, a brief, tight hug that said everything they had left unsaid, and then he shouldered his pack and walked down the road toward Miller's Crossing. She watched until he was out of sight, feeling the weight of the past finally lift from her shoulders. Then she went inside, washed her face, and started planning what she would say to Henrik. But when Henrik's usual delivery day came, it was not him who arrived. The substitute carrier, a young human man she had never seen before, dropped off the mail with a polite nod and drove on without lingering. Lyra stood holding the bundle of letters and feeling panic rise in her chest. Had Henrik changed routes? Had he decided she was not worth the trouble? She walked down to Miller's Crossing the next day and found Thomas at the postal depot. He looked up when she entered, and his expression shifted into something like sympathy. "Lyra," he said, "I suppose you are looking for Henrik." "Where is he?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "He asked to be reassigned," Thomas said. "Said he needed a change of scenery. I tried to talk him out of it, told him he had the best route in the territory, but he was set on it. He left 3 days ago to take over the Northern Circuit." Lyra felt the floor drop out from under her. "The Northern Circuit, but that is 2 weeks' travel from here." "I know," Thomas said. "I am sorry. If it helps," he looked pretty miserable about it. Lyra walked back to the press house in a daze. She had waited too long. She had been so caught up in her own fear and indecision that she had let Henrik slip away. And now he was gone, and she had no way to tell him what she should have said weeks ago. The next few days were the worst of her life. She threw herself into work, pressing the last of the harvest and preparing the orchard for winter, but nothing could distract her from the aching sense of loss. She had finally figured out what she wanted, had finally found the courage to reach for it, and she was too late. On the fourth evening after Thomas had given her the news, Lyra was closing up the press house when she heard footsteps on the road. She looked up, expecting a late traveler, and froze. Henrik was walking up the road toward her, his satchel slung over his shoulder and his face set in determined lines. He looked travel-worn and exhausted, but his eyes were bright with something that might have been hope or might have been desperation. "Henrik," Lyra breathed, her heart leaping into her throat. "I could not do it," he said without preamble. "I got 2 days up the northern road and I turned around. Thomas is probably going to fire me, but I do not care. I could not leave without knowing." "Knowing what?" Lyra asked, even though she thought she knew. "Whether you chose him," Henrik said. "Whether you are going to marry your soldier and live happily ever after. Because if you are, I need to hear you say it. I need to know so I can stop hoping." "My ex wants me back," Lyra said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "That is what the letter said. He showed up here and stayed for 2 weeks and asked me to give him another chance." Henrik's face went very still. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him no," Lyra said. "I told him I am not the person I was, and that I do not want to spend my life trying to get back to something that is already gone." Henrik took a step forward, and Lyra saw the way his hands were shaking. "Why?" he asked, and his voice was raw. "Why did you tell him no?" "Because of you," Lyra said simply. "Because I spent the last year waiting for your visits and looking forward to your smile and wishing you would stay longer. Because you made me feel like maybe I could risk my heart again. Because when I thought about the future, I kept seeing you in it." Henrik let out a shaky breath, and Lyra saw tears shining in his eyes. "I am terrified," he said. "I am absolutely terrified of this, of you, of what it means if we try and it does not work." "I am terrified too," Lyra admitted, "but I am more terrified of never trying." They stood looking at each other in the fading light, and Lyra felt something shift and settle in her chest. This was right. This was what she wanted, fear and uncertainty and all. "Lyra," Henrik said, and took another step forward. "I think I am falling in love with you. I think I have been falling in love with you for months, and I am so tired of pretending I am not." "Good," Lyra said, and felt a smile break across her face. "Because I think I am falling in love with you too." Henrik laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy, and closed the distance between them. He reached out and took her hands, his fingers warm and solid around hers, and Lyra felt the last of her fear melt away. This was real. This was happening, and maybe it would not be easy, but it would be worth it. "Can I kiss you?" Henrik asked, and his voice was soft and wondering. "I thought you would never ask," Lyra said. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back, but she did not want to pull back. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the future they could build together. When his lips met hers, it was soft and careful and absolutely perfect. She kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into that moment, and felt him respond with equal intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Henrik rested his forehead against hers and laughed again. "I cannot believe I almost left," he said. "I almost let you go." "But you came back," Lyra said. "That is what matters." They stood together in the doorway of the press house as the last light faded from the sky, and Lyra felt something she had not felt in years, complete and utter contentment. The past was behind her, the future was uncertain. But right now, in this moment, she had everything she needed. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Henrik officially transferred back to his old route, much to Thomas's relief, and resumed his regular deliveries. But now when he arrived, he stayed. He helped with the orchard work, learning to prune and harvest with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He asked endless questions about cider making, genuinely interested in the process. And Lyra found herself explaining the intricacies of fermentation and pressing with enthusiasm she had not known she possessed. In the evenings, they would sit in the press house and talk. Henrik told her about his past, about the woman who had left him, and the years he had spent building walls around his heart. Lyra told him about Garth, about the pain of being left and the fear of trusting again. They shared their scars and their fears, and in the sharing, they built something stronger than either of them had known before. Henrik was different from Garth in every way that mattered. Where Garth had been steady and certain, Henrik was playful and spontaneous. Where Garth had treated love as a duty, Henrik treated it as an adventure. He made Lyra laugh, made her feel light in a way she had not felt since she was young. But he was also there when she needed steadiness, reliable and true when it counted. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in mid-November and blanketing the orchard in white. The cider press closed for the season, and Lyra settled into the quieter rhythm of winter maintenance and planning for the next year. Henrik continued his mail route, but now he stayed overnight at the press house more often than not, and slowly, naturally, they began building a shared life. One evening in early December, Henrik arrived with a bundle of papers instead of his usual mail pouch. Lyra looked up from the account books she was reviewing and raised an eyebrow. "What is that?" she asked. "Letters," Henrik said, and there was something nervous in his expression that made her curious. "Old letters, actually, from when I was engaged before." Lyra set down her pen and gave him her full attention. They had talked about his past, but he had never offered to show her the actual letters. "Why are you bringing them now?" "Because I want to burn them," Henrik said simply. "I have been carrying them around for 6 years, and I am done. I do not want to hold onto that pain anymore. I want to let it go." Lyra stood and crossed to where he was standing. She took the bundle of letters from his hands and held them for a moment, feeling the weight of his old hurt. Then she walked to the fireplace and tossed them into the flames. They caught quickly, the old paper curling and blackening, and Henrik came to stand beside her and watch them burn. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being worth the risk," Henrik said. "For making me believe again." Lyra leaned against his shoulder, and they stood together watching the past turn to ash. In January, a letter arrived for Lyra from the Eastern Front. She recognized Garth's handwriting on the envelope, and her heart clenched with old guilt. She had not heard from him since he left, had not known if he was safe or angry or hurting. She opened the letter carefully, and Henrik watched from across the room with patient understanding. The letter was brief and warm. Garth wrote that he had met someone, an orc woman who served in the medical corps, and that he thought it might be serious. He thanked Lyra for her honesty, told her he hoped she was happy, and said he had no regrets about coming to see her. "Sometimes," he wrote, "you need to say goodbye to the past before you can fully embrace the future. I am glad we got to say goodbye. I hope you have found what you are looking for." Lyra read the letter aloud to Henrik, and when she finished, she found herself smiling. "He is happy," she said. "He found someone." "Good," Henrik said sincerely. "He deserves it. You both do." Lyra folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. It felt like a benediction, a final closing of that chapter of her life. She had loved Garth and she had let him go, and now they were both moving forward. It was right. Spring arrived with a rush of warmth and new growth, and the orchard exploded into bloom. Lyra hired back her seasonal workers and began the new harvest season with Henrik working beside her. The roadside stand reopened, and travelers stopped to buy cider and apples, and often stayed to chat with the friendly orc woman and her human partner. They faced prejudice, of course. Some travelers muttered about unnatural pairings or looked at Lyra with suspicion. But Henrik met every hostile comment with calm firmness, and Lyra refused to let anyone's small-mindedness diminish her happiness. They were building something real together, And that was all that mattered. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch of the press house watching the sunset paint the orchard in shades of gold and pink, Henrik reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I made this," he said, and handed it to her. Lyra opened the box and found a ring inside, carved from apple wood and polished to a soft gleam. It was simple and beautiful, and when she looked up at Henrik, he was watching her with nervous hope. "I am not good with big speeches," Henrik said. "And I know we have only been together a few months, really together I mean, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Lyra. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you throw yourself into everything you do. I love that you took a chance on me even though you were scared. I want to spend the rest of my life making cider with you and running mail routes and sitting on this porch watching the sunset. Will you marry me?" Lyra felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." Henrik let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, warm against her skin. They kissed on the porch as the sun set behind the orchard, and Lyra felt a happiness so complete it almost hurt. They were married in June, in a simple ceremony at the press house with Thomas, and a few friends from Miller's Crossing in attendance. Lyra wore a simple green dress that matched her skin, and Henrik wore his best shirt and could not stop smiling. The ceremony was brief and informal, and afterward they served cider from the press and danced in the orchard under the stars. That night, lying in bed with Henrik's arms around her and the sound of the wind in the apple trees outside, Lyra thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had been hurt and afraid, had built walls to protect herself, had nearly let fear keep her from the happiness she deserved. But she had taken the risk, had opened her heart again, and it had been worth it. "What are you thinking about?" Henrik murmured, his voice drowsy and content. "How lucky I am," Lyra said simply. "I am the lucky one," Henrik said and kissed the top of her head. "I get to spend the rest of my life with you." They fell asleep tangled together, the future stretching out before them bright and full of promise. The years that followed were good ones. The orchard prospered, and Lyra and Henrik expanded the business, buying the adjacent land and planting new varieties of apples. Henrik continued his mail route, but he adjusted his schedule to spend more time at home, and slowly the press house became less Lyra's and more theirs. They built an addition to house a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen, and Henrik carved decorations into the wooden beams that made Lyra smile every time she saw them. In the second year of their marriage, Lyra discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure, but when their daughter was born in the early spring, healthy and squalling, all the fear melted away. They named her Joanna, and she had her mother's green skin and her father's warm brown eyes. Henrik carried her everywhere, marveling at her tiny fingers and the way she gripped his thumb, and Lyra watched her stern mail carrier husband transform into a gentle, doting father. Joanna grew up surrounded by love and apple blossoms, learning to walk between the orchard rows and falling asleep to the sound of the cider press. She was bold and curious, with Lyra's determination and Henrik's easy charm, and she was the center of their world. When Joanna was 3, Henrik received an offer to become the regional postal manager, a promotion that would mean better pay and more stability. He turned it down without hesitation, saying he had everything he needed right where he was. Lyra loved him fiercely for that choice, for choosing their life together over ambition or status. They had challenges, of course. There were lean years when the harvest was poor, and hard winters when money was tight. There were still people who looked askance at their mixed marriage, who muttered about half-breed children or unnatural unions. But Henrik and Lyra faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. One autumn evening, when Joanna was 5 years old, a familiar figure walked up the road to the press house. Lyra was closing up for the day when she looked up and saw Garth approaching, older now but still unmistakably himself. Her heart gave a small lurch, not of longing but of surprise and curiosity. "Garth," she said, setting down the crate of apples she had been carrying. "This is unexpected." "I hope it is all right," Garth said, a little awkwardly. "I am passing through the area, and I wanted to stop and see how you were doing." Henrik emerged from the press house. Joanna perched on his shoulders, and Lyra saw him assess the situation with quick understanding. But his expression remained open and friendly as he approached. "You must be Garth," Henrik said, extending his hand. "I have heard a lot about you." Garth shook his hand, and Lyra saw relief flash across his face. "Good things, I hope." "Very good things," Henrik assured him. "You want to stay for dinner? We have plenty." They ate together that evening, Joanna chattering happily between bites and the adults talking about their lives and the years that had passed. Garth told them about the orc woman he had met, whose name was Lyra, and how they had married 2 years ago and were expecting their first child. He spoke about his work in the border settlements, helping to negotiate peace agreements and build bridges between orc and human communities. It was strange, Lyra thought, how easy it was to sit across from the man she had once loved and feel nothing but genuine happiness for his contentment. The past had lost its power to hurt, had become simply part of the story that had led her here. When Garth left the next morning, he embraced Lyra once more, but it was the embrace of old friends, not lost lovers. "You found what you needed," he said quietly. "So did you," Lyra replied. "I am happy for you, Garth." "And I am happy for you," he said. "Take care of each other." She watched him walk away down the road, and then she turned back to the press house, where Henrik was helping Joanna feed the chickens, her family, her home, her life. When Joanna was 7, Lyra and Henrik had their second child, a boy they named Marcus, who had his father's sandy hair and his mother's pointed ears. He was quieter than his sister, but equally loved, and the press house rang with the sound of children's laughter and running feet. Lyra taught her children about apples and cider making, about the value of hard work and the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. Henrik taught them to read and write, to treat everyone with respect regardless of species, and to never be afraid to take a chance on love. Together, they built a family that was strong and whole, rooted in the frontier soil and growing toward the sun. One winter evening, years after they had married, Lyra and Henrik sat by the fire while the children slept upstairs. The press house was quiet, the orchard dark beyond the windows, and they were reading together in comfortable silence. Henrik had taken to asking Lyra to teach him to read and write in Orcish script, saying he wanted to understand her language and heritage better. She had been teaching him slowly, patiently, the way he had once read human letters aloud to her. "Look at this," Henrik said, and showed her the page he had been working on. It was covered in careful Orcish letters, the script still shaky but readable. He had written, "I love you in every language, but most of all in the language of home." Lyra felt tears prick her eyes, moved by the simple declaration and the effort he had put into writing it. "It is perfect," she said. "Not quite," Henrik said with a grin, "but I am getting better." They sat together by the firelight, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against his chest, and Lyra thought about how far they had both come. From broken hearts and fear to this warm, steady happiness. It had taken courage to let go of the past and reach for the future, but she had never regretted it, not for a single moment. "You ever think about the day you read Garth's letter?" Lyra asked quietly. "Sometimes," Henrik admitted. "I remember being terrified that I was going to lose you before I ever really had you." "What changed your mind? What made you come back?" Henrik was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I realized that I would rather risk being hurt than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. You taught me that. You took a chance on me even though you were scared, and that gave me the courage to take a chance too." "I am glad you did," Lyra said softly. "I am so glad." "So am I," Henrik said and kissed the top of her head. "Every single day." The fire crackled in the hearth, and outside the winter wind whispered through the bare apple trees. Upstairs, their children slept safe and warm. And in the press house, two people who had been broken and afraid sat together in perfect contentment, their past behind them and their future bright with promise. Many years later, when Lyra was an old woman and the press house had been passed down to Joanna and her family, she would look back on her life and see it as a story of healing. She had loved and lost, had built walls to protect herself, and had finally found the courage to tear those walls down. She had chosen risk over safety, possibility over certainty, and in doing so had found a happiness deeper than anything she had imagined in her youth. But on that winter evening by the fire, with Henrik's arms around her and her children sleeping upstairs, she did not think about the future or the past. She simply existed in the moment, grateful for the journey that had brought her home. The night deepened, and the fire burned low, and Lyra and Henrik sat together in the warm darkness, two hearts that had found their way to each other against all odds. Outside, the orchard waited for spring, and inside, love kept the winter at bay. It was enough. It was everything. It was home.